So we've already done absolute value equations. That's where you set up a positive situation and a negative situation. The positive situation is writing it exactly the way it is without the absolute value symbols, without the sticks. The negative situation is the same thing, but you change the sign of the right-hand side. That's when it was an equation. And an inequality is the same thing, right? So let's first go through the steps here. Step one, to solve an absolute value equation or inequality, step one is to make sure the absolute value is by itself on one side. Okay, so that's step one, to get it by itself. Okay, you want to get it by itself on one side. So what do I mean by that? You could see the example down here. It's an absolute value inequality. The absolute value is not by itself on the left-hand side of the inequality. There's a +7 and there's a -2. So step one would be to get rid of the +7 by subtracting 7 on both sides. And you would also want to get rid of that -2 in front. You don't distribute, you actually get rid of it by dividing by -2. We'll get to that in a little while. Right now, let's just understand that step one is to get it by itself, get the absolute value by itself on one side. Now, step two is to set up two situations, a positive situation and a negative situation. And normally, when I show my work, I do pos, neg as like notes. I put it up there, pos, neg. Now, how do you do the positive situation? You write it exactly the way it is without the absolute values. I put without the sticks, right? So you just ignore them. You take off the sticks. Now, the negative situation, again, you write it without the sticks, but you flip the inequality symbol and change the sign of the right side, okay? So let's, and then after you do both positive and negative situations, you solve both. And if it's an inequality, which we are going to have inequalities on this section, it's only inequalities, decide if it should be written together or separate with the word or. So we must, after we solve them, we must think about the answers and think about a number line. And if the areas on the number line are together, that means that we need to write them together as a compound inequality. But if the areas are apart, that means you just leave both answers separate, but with the word or between them. So let's take a look at this example. Again, step one is to isolate it. So, and you guys could follow along right here on your notes. You could subtract 7 and subtract 7, okay? And what would I have left? You're going to have to write really tiny right there. You're going to have -2, absolute value, x minus 3, absolute value is less than -10. Yeah? And now for my final step, I'd have to divide by -2, and it'll cancel, divide by -2. Now we are dividing by a negative right here. I know it's all cramped and looking ugly right there, but I'm dividing by a negative, so this less than symbol, since I divided by a negative, it has to flip and become a greater than symbol. Does that make sense? Okay, so what is -10 divided by -2? It's +5. And once again, because I divided by a negative, this less than became a greater than symbol. So that was step one, isolating the absolute value. Sometimes step one is done for you, but in this case it wasn't. You had to get the absolute value by itself. So there's no more number out here, there's no more number back here. It's just the absolute value all by itself. And now we can move on to step two, which is writing a positive situation and a negative situation. Again, the positive situation is writing this exactly the way it is without these sticks, right? Without the absolute value symbols. So what do we have? We have x minus 3 is greater than 5. That's exactly what it says right here. X minus 3 is greater than 5. Everybody with me? Now the negative situation is the same exact thing, but you flip the symbol and change the sign. So this x minus 3, it's identical. X minus 3. You have to flip this symbol. This greater than symbol now becomes a less than, and the +5 became a -5. Okay? So again, the positive situation, once it's isolated, the positive situation is writing it exactly the way it is without the absolute values. The negative situation is the same thing as this, but you change the sign and change the sign. Flip the symbol, change the sign. Flip the symbol, change the sign. That's what we do for the negative situation. Anyway, once you have step two done, now you could actually go through and solve. How do you solve this? Well, you're going to go plus 3, x is greater than 8. That's what I have down here. Plus 3, x is less than -2. That's what I have right there. So those are my two answers. Now, the question is, do I write both of these answers together as a compound inequality, or do I just put the word or right between them? That's the question. I don't know if I'm going to put the word or right between them, or if I'm going to actually write both of these guys together. I don't know if I'm going to do that. So how do I do that? Let me erase this. How do I do that? I need to think about the number line. That's the only way to find out if you're going to write them together or not. So let's do a quick sketch on a number line. Here's a number line. And let me put both values on the number line. Well, I know positive 8 is going to be over here on the right because it's greater. And the negative 2 is going to be somewhere over here on the left because it's less. Okay, now these are going to be open dots, which right here really doesn't really matter that much, whether it's open or closed, because they're not asking you to write the number line as your answer. But anyway, they're open dots because it doesn't have a solid line underneath it. And if we take a look at this first one, it says x is greater than 8. And we know that greater than is to the right. Yay? And the other one says x is less than negative 2. Less than is to the left. So these areas right here are apart. They're both going in opposite directions. They're separate, which means that the area is either going this way or that way. Keyword or, so you really do have to put the word or between it, and there's your final answer right there. So this was our example on our notes, and that's why down here it shows both answers with the word or right between it. Okay, now I might as well do like a little example of when you will have the areas together. Now let's say I was working out my positive and my negative situation, and let's say I got one answer that was x is greater than, give me a negative number. Negative 2. Okay, and how about, let's say that was one answer. And let me get another one. Let's say x is less than, give me a positive number. What? 3? Okay, so let's say we got those two answers. Yeah? Now, you need to determine whether you're going to put the word or between it or not. Right? Let me erase it because I'm not sure. The only way to determine whether you put the word or between it or whether you write it together is by looking at a number line. So let's do a quick sketch of a number line. Let me put my two numbers, my negative 2 right here and my positive 3 over here. And when I think about this first one, x is greater than negative 2. Okay, open dot, greater than's to the right. And the other one, x is less than 3. Okay, so it's going to be open dot, less than's to the left. So this is an area, as you can see, that's together. Okay, so I could actually connect it. And now, because the area is connected, I cannot write the word or between it. Or means that the areas are going apart, right? So right here, I need to actually write it together as a compound inequality. And it becomes very easy to do. All you do is put the x in the middle, bring your smaller number to the left, your bigger number to the right, and that's automatic, because if you did a number line to start with, the smaller number's already on the left, the bigger number's already on the right. Okay, so what do we do now? We just put the less than symbols. Why? Why is that? Well, because the numbers on this side are always going to be less than, and the numbers on this side are always going to be greater than. So that's why you could always trust to put the less than symbols. That's only if you did use a number line and you have the smaller numbers on this side and the bigger numbers on this side. You could always put less than symbols right there. And this is your compound inequality. This is your final perfect answer that you'll get full credit for on your test Friday. Now, if you left it like this, as two separate inequalities, I could give you half credit. But you want full credit, you need to be able to look at your number line, realize that the areas are together, so my inequalities have to be written together. Okie doke? Yay. Going back to our notes, if we look at the bottom part of our notes, it says down here, if you have an absolute value equaling a negative number, or after isolating it, then there's no solution because there's no negative answer to an absolute value. Or there is no answer that will be negative to an absolute value. So, I know we're dealing with inequalities. Do we all understand this example right here? That the absolute value of something is always going to be positive. So if you have a negative, then you would say no solution. Yay? Okay. But that's only if it's isolated. Because what if I actually had like a negative 2 out here in front? Then you would have to divide by negative 2, divide by negative 2, and this is really not a negative anymore. What would that be? That'd be a positive 1, right? Positive 1. So don't think, oh, if it's a negative, it has to be no solution. It all depends on if it's isolated. If it's isolated, there's no number out here in the front, then yeah, it's negative, you could say no solution. How is that going to apply to inequalities? Well, like let's say you had something like this. The absolute value of x plus 3, close parentheses, is less than negative 1. Do you have to do any work right here? No. Why is that? Because this is saying that this is going to be less than negative 1. And we know that's impossible because it's not going to be a negative number. It's not going to be a negative value. It has to be greater than 0, right? Or greater than or equal to 0. So this is an impossibility right there. You could also say no solution for this particular question. Okay? So let's move on to our worksheet, our homework. Which one would you guys like to do? 1, 2, or 3? Pick one. Number 2, why not? Okay, so step 1 is to isolate the absolute value. Is it isolated? Is there a number on the outside? No. Okay, so you don't have to worry about step 1 because it's already done for you. All you got to do now is the positive situation. Now you're probably going to have to do this on a separate sheet of paper. There's not a lot of space. I don't have to zoom in to make space for number 2. So the positive situation is going to be writing it exactly the way it is without the absolute value. And the negative situation is writing it exactly the way it is, but flipping the inequality symbol, changing the inequality symbol. That's why it's greater than now instead of a less than. And also changing the sign of the right-hand side of your inequality. So you solve both of them. Let me zoom in and solve the positive situation first. We're going to subtract 1. It's going to be 2x is less than 4. And we're going to divide by 2 and divide by 2. We will have x is less than 2. Now this is an answer. Let's do the other negative situation. We're going to subtract 1 also. It's going to cancel. Subtract 1. You're going to have 2x is greater than negative 6. So we're going to divide by 2, and we have x is greater than negative 3. So those are our 2 answers. Now the question is, do I write these together or apart? You'd have to think about a number line. Now I already know that we have these multiple choice answers over here, but I'm not going to look at those right now. I'm going to just do a quick sketch of my own number line. Obviously the negative is on the negative side, and the positive 2 is on the positive side, 0 somewhere in the middle. Okay. When I think about x is less than 2, less than is to the left. When I think about the other one, x is greater than negative 3. Greater than is to the right. This area is together with open dots. You could match it up. Which one is it? C. That's exactly right. Okay. Now this is the absolute last part of our test on Friday, so it's very important that we practice. We understand all this and be able to do all these questions. The answers are on the back side of your worksheet. Now, there's still another portion. So far, you guys know how to solve and graph, but there's this other section where you have to be able to look at number line and come up with the absolute value inequality. Okay? So because we don't have that much time, we're just going to leave it at that and do another video where I explain how to come up with the absolute value inequalities that produce these graphs, okay?